Hi everybody, my name is Jonathan Kehew. Welcome to the Music Corner. This episode is going to focus on changing chords. Changing chords is one of the trickiest things for guitar players. Typically, it's your weaker hand, in my case my left hand, that's doing the pretty complicated job of all those different chord grips. Now, if you're just starting off on the guitar, you might be new to chords, but if you've played for a little while already, you've probably been tackling chords for a few weeks, a few months, or longer. Chords are mandatory for guitar players. You can't get away from mastering at least the basic 12 or 16 most common chords, but they can be problematic. For example, our right hand, in my case, my dominant right hand, wants to do a lot of things on the guitar. It's often held back because my left hand can't quite keep up with its end of the deal. The guitar is kind of unique that way. Our two hands are doing fundamentally different jobs. You think of a piano player, both hands are playing the keys. Saxophone, both hands are pressing the keys. The guitar, the two hands are doing fundamentally different tasks with fundamentally different challenges. So if you play the guitar already, or if you're just starting out, stick around for the next 30 minutes, and we're going to work on changing chords and hopefully make you a better guitar player. So grab your guitar, let's get started. You can't get away from chords on the guitar because the guitar is one of the most popular instruments that can provide chords to the world. The guitar and the piano. Now that the accordion has sort of lost its popularity a little bit, the guitar and the piano are your two main chord instruments. Every song needs chords. Chords are the foundation of a song. So someone's got to play the chords, and typically it's the guitar player, unless you have a piano player handy. All right, so let's talk about how you can get better at chords, whether you're just starting off or if you've been playing for a little while but you feel like your left hand isn't quite keeping up with the task here. I'm going to give you some quick tips right from the very start. When you're playing the guitar, your left hand elbow over here has to be free in the air. Occasionally it can be tempting to slouch over a little bit, depending where you're sitting on your sofa. You might find your elbow resting on your leg here. It's going to slow you down, especially if you're not changing chords as fast as you want to. Got to have that left elbow up in the air, okay? And remind yourself of that. It's going to help you quite a bit with your mobility. You want to find a comfortable chair to sit in, and yet at the same time you don't want to slouch over and let that elbow rest down there. Another huge part of developing a quick left hand, especially for chord changes, is your thumb. Now, if you've watched a lot of DVDs or YouTube videos or live performances, if you've watched your friends play the guitar, you may notice that the thumb really moves around a lot. You might see the thumb sort of hanging on the top of the guitar. Say if a musician is strumming chords, they might just grab the guitar like a snow shovel. See how my left thumb here is sort of just hanging on the top of the guitar? Now, I'm not going to say that's a good technique or a bad technique, but you can get away with it with experience, meaning your fingers can curl around enough that it doesn't really matter where you put your thumb, in some instances. Mostly it's when you've had a lot of experience playing chords or lead guitar, and your fingers have developed a nice natural curve of their own. Now, for other instances, and especially for beginning guitar players, where you put your thumb can be life or death. You may have to put your thumb around the curved part, the back of the neck, almost out of sight, pointing straight up towards the ceiling. Now, you may have to do that so your fingers can curl over the open strings and just get to where they really want to go without dampening the open strings. Where you put your thumb is partly a personal choice, but partly out of necessity. You may have to really pay attention to where you put your thumb. So as I play today, we're going to talk a little bit about that. One thing I like to tell my students is you want to be comfortable and you want to be effective. Of course, you don't want to put your thumb in a position that causes you any pain or discomfort, but sometimes your thumb is the missing link. It's the one item that needs to be adjusted so that your chords come out nice and clear and you can switch quickly to the next chord. So keep that in mind during today's episode. No matter where you see me put my thumb or what you see my other fingers doing, where you put your thumb is going to make a big difference. Okay, another important factor in getting better at the guitar and better at changing chords specifically is using the very tips of your left hand finger. Most of the time you can't get away with using the fleshy pad of your finger, and the sound isn't so great anyways. So unless I mention differently or your teacher mentions differently, stay right on the tips of your left hand, right up by the fingernail. It's a little sensitive there, but it's worth it, and that skin will toughen up the more you play. All right. So we talked about your elbow being free. We talked about your thumb. Let's call it mobile. I like your thumb to be mobile, meaning for some chords your thumb might be in one position, for other chords it might be another position. You certainly don't want your thumb locked in any one position, okay? Keep your thumb flexible. And like I said, keep your eyes on YouTube videos or any other DVDs you might watch or your friends when they play, and you'll see that their thumbs may move around pretty substantially depending on exactly what they're playing. All right, so now let's get into some specifics. Let's take two chords that go together well, the E minor chord and the A chord. So let's take a look at my left hand here. The E minor chord of my left hand. I'm going to use my index and middle fingers. Index finger, the 5th string, 2nd fret. Middle finger, 4th string, 2nd fret. Now a lot of you know this chord already. Most people agree that it's the easiest chord of the fundamental chords that everybody has to learn. Good old E minor. And when you play E minor, I encourage you to strum all 6 strings with your left hand. Now I'm hoping that you're doing this chord right now, that's not posing any difficulties for you, and perhaps you already know this chord, and that's great. Now what I'm going to ask you to do is move that E minor over to an A major chord. See what I just did? I moved my fingers down towards my knee. The A major chord. Index finger, 4th string, 2nd fret. Middle finger, 3rd string, 2nd fret. Ring finger, 2nd string, 2nd fret. So here's my E minor, and here's my A. Right, so as I talk for the next few minutes, we're going to be using those two chords as our chords to improve your technique in changing. These are two of the easiest chords, but that doesn't mean they can't be improved upon. It doesn't mean that changing between them is easy right from the start. So here's what I want you to think about. Find your E minor chord. Take a good look at your left hand. Make sure you're using the tips of those fingers. Make sure you're curling around your fingers. I call that a rainbow curve, this curve right here. Okay? Now, I've done previous episodes on playing chords themselves. So today's episode is really going to be about how to change from one chord to another. Transitions. Transitions are usually where people get bogged down in guitar playing and in changing chords. So here's some tips. First of all, settle in for the long haul here. If with the different chord progressions that we're doing today, if some of them are easy, don't worry, we'll get to harder ones in a moment. But you got to settle in for the long haul, and by that I mean you're going to plan on doing these a lot. We're barely even going to talk about strumming the guitar in this episode. We're really going to focus on your left hand. And when you're practicing this stuff at home, I would encourage you to focus just on your left hand. Don't worry about adding in some fancy strumming. Don't worry about singing along. To really master chord changes, you really have to focus. Okay? So let's talk about this. E minor to A. So if the camera zooms in here on my left hand, you're going to notice when I do this E minor to A, I sure make it look easy, right? 2 fingers, drop them down, add a 3rd finger. E minor to A major. E minor to A major. Now here's why I make it look easy. I'm moving my fingers as little as possible. Now that might sound like common sense, but let me show you a worst case scenario. Here's my E minor chord. Worst case, someone lets their fingers completely leave the guitar, and then they have to find their way back again. It's the most common thing I see beginner guitar players do, and I did it myself. Because our fingers aren't used to these subtle movements. Certainly if you're right-handed, you're not used to your left-handed making these subtle movements, okay? So, first tip, right off the bat, keep your fingertips as close as possible to the guitar. As close to the strings as you can. Even my pinky, you can see my pinky is starting to drift off a little bit here. I don't need my pinky for this A chord or for the E minor chord, but really it's a good habit to have that pinky close. Because for future chord changes, I will need to have control over that pinky finger. So this is called finger control. Point number 1, keep that finger control disciplined, okay? Don't let any finger drift off. And it's going to be tricky at first. If you got it with these two chords, you feel like you have good finger control with these two chords, don't worry, there's more challenging grips coming up. I chose these two specifically because E minor and A major are pretty accessible chords. Okay, so point number 1, finger control. Okay, keeping those fingertips nice and close. Point number 2, you got to have these chords memorized. Okay, now we're only talking about 2 chords here, E minor and A. Pretty easy to memorize 2 chords. If you have to refer to a sheet of paper, after a while it's going to be slowing you down. So whatever chords you're working on, whether it's here with me in this episode of the Music Corner, or if you're working on a specific song and maybe there's a certain chord progression or chord change that just isn't working out for you, you've got to memorize what those chords look like, meaning memorize what your left hand is going to do. Your eyes really have to be in your left hand at all times, okay, for this particular instance. So point number one, finger control, right? Fingertips as close as possible to the strings. Point number two, memorize those chords. You don't want to have to look at your music stand or look at a piece of paper. You really want to have those chords memorized. Whether it takes you 5 minutes to memorize them, a day or two, doesn't matter. Chances are the song you're working on uses some of the fundamental chords, A major, C major, D minor. You're going to want to have those chords memorized anyway, so we might as well start right now with memorizing those chords. Okay. Now remember I said settle in for the long haul? What I'm going to ask you to do with me right now, and certainly in your practice sessions, is to repeat this chord progression as many times as you can stand it. It might not seem like the most exciting thing, but it's worth it in the long run. So here's what I'm going to suggest. 4 steady strums on the E minor and 4 steady strums on the A major, just like this. You can play along with me here if you want to. A 4 times, 2, 3, 4, and then E minor, and A. Now for you experienced guitar players, this probably seems like no big deal to you, but stick around and pay attention during the show, because sooner or later you're going to be having to teach someone in your family, a friend, a loved one, how to play the guitar, and maybe a few of the things I say today might help you teach someone else how to get through the tricky part of the guitar process, which is mastering changing chords. Okay, so this can get a little dry after a while, right? Changing from 2 chords over and over again. So how can you make it interesting? Well, we have to find a way to make it interesting, because I hope you're going to do it 100 times. How do you make it interesting? Get a little stopwatch, or use your phone, anything that has a little clock on it, and say, I'm going to do this as many times as possible for 60 seconds. Now the idea here is you're teaching your fingers muscle memory. You know, you're getting these 2 chords into your muscles, and beyond that, you're also teaching your fingers how to change conveniently between these 2 chords as quickly as possible. So what I'm going to suggest is you take something like a stopwatch, strum each chord 1 time, because the idea here is not beautiful music. Ultimately, that's the big goal, but the idea right now is take a minute of your life and do E minor and A as many times as possible for 1 minute. I call that the minute of pain. Not too much pain though, okay? So if I strum each chord 1 time only, like this, E minor, A, E minor, A. I can get a lot of practice in 60 seconds. As you know, 60 seconds in general goes by like that. But when you're focusing on a specific task, you can actually get a lot done in 60 seconds. If you feel up to it, make it 2 minutes, make it 3 minutes, okay? But the point is, we're going to focus 99% of your energy on simply changing between these 2 chords, okay? Now, your right hand is going to give a little strum just to give your right hand something to do, and also to get some satisfaction out of this process, because these chords do sound nice, you know? So I want you to consider that minute of pain, okay? When you're doing your practicing, it could be with a much more challenging chord progression based on a song that you're working on, something with some interesting jazz chords, you name it. But the principle is a great principle, which is focus in on where chord changing is slowing you down or holding you up. Focus in on those 2 chords. Now there might be more than 2 chords, but focus on 2 chords. Do them back and forth as many times as you can stand it, okay? Remember, you're investing in yourself here as a guitar player, okay? It may not be the most exciting minute of your day. It probably won't be. But if you look in terms of the long run, you know, I think a year from now, you're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff with all these different chords, even if you only learn 12 or 15 of the most basic chords. You're going to use them the rest of your life. So spending a minute here and there, really mastering these chords, investing that time, it's time well spent. No one's ever regretted mastering chords. Okay, so we've been talking about changing between E minor and A major. Notice my elbow has been up off my leg. My thumb, what works for me right now, is having my thumb up about like this. Now that works for me, doesn't mean it's going to be right for you. A lot of beginning students really have to push their wrists out a little bit, not so much that it hurts, but push their wrists out a little bit, and their thumbs sort of end up right in the curvy part of the neck. And if you look closely, you notice you can't see my thumb anymore, right? on my left hand, it sort of disappeared. I've seen a lot of instructors encourage their students to have what they call an invisible thumb. And that's not a bad idea. You know, essentially make it so that the viewer or your fans watching you out there, they can't see your thumb. That means your thumb is on the curvy part of the neck and it's hidden back there. Great advice. As you get more experience on the guitar, you may well be able to get away with having your thumb up here. And what's the big change? Well, I'm not a hand surgeon here, but my guess is that what's happening is as you play the guitar for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, your fingers develop a natural way of curling around themselves, as if they're just more flexible than they were before you started playing the guitar. And then where you put your thumb is not so important. In the beginning, you got to push your wrist out to create this curve right here with the left hand. But as you get more experience, your fingers have a nice natural curve, and they can do a lot for you without being forced to do it by pushing your wrist out. Again, where you put your thumb is a personal preference. But of course, we want you to be an effective guitar player, right? So be comfortable with where you put your thumb and put it in a way that can really support your fingers, in a way that can help your fingers curl around, okay? And then watch what other people do. You know, if you're taking lessons from a teacher, ask your teacher for advice. But where you put your thumb is going to definitely affect the sound of your chords, and can affect how you change between two chords. Your thumb might be in one place for one chord and a different place for another chord, and that's okay, as long as you're getting a good sound, as long as you're comfortable. Okay, so our theme today, of course, is changing chords. I've taught a lot of students for more than 20 years now, and it's pretty much the #1 obstacle that most students face pretty early on. They've learned a few different ways of strumming with their strumming hand. They understand how to play a chord. They've memorized how songs go. They know a lot of the principles at work in terms of how music works. And yet, after all their work, they may have been playing for 6 months or a year, and they feel like their left hand isn't quite keeping up. So that's what today's program is addressing. Let's pick 2 different chords. Okay, we talked about A major and E minor. Let's talk about C and G. Again, 2 of the most common chords. You can't play the guitar and avoid a C chord and a G chord. You see it all over the place. Millions of hit songs have been written with C and G. Now, you may already know a C chord, but let's take a minute here and look at my left hand. Here's your C major chord. Index finger. It's always good to use your index finger as your reference point to start off. 2nd string, 1st fret. Middle finger, 4th string, 2nd fret. Ring finger, 5th string, 3rd fret, the C major chord. Okay, so let's stay focused on the left hand here. Now again, when I'm playing my C major chord, I can get away with my thumb being up here. That might not be right for you. You might want to push your wrist out a little bit. That thumb's going to disappear there behind the guitar, and it creates a nice almost semicircular shape here, because we want strings to ring clearly whether you're pressing on them or not. We want to curl around and avoid those other strings. Now see what my pinky's doing? It's drifting off here, right? Earlier on I said it's a good idea to keep all your fingers in close, even if it's not doing any work. It's a good habit. In fact, it's pretty much a mandatory habit to keep that finger in close. Okay? Don't let your finger drift off. It's hard to do though. It's a real mind over matter kind of process. So there's my C chord. Now, one of the absolute most common partners to a C chord is the G chord. C and G just sound great together. Now when it's time to go to a G chord, watch carefully. C and G have a lot in common if you do it right. Now here comes the G chord. The first thing I'm going to do with my C chord is I'm going to take my middle and ring over here. They're each going to move 1 string up towards me, up towards my chin. 1 string over like this. See that? They have the same relationship they had a minute ago. You know, they're on neighboring strings. But now they're on the 2 fat strings. I don't need my pointer finger for the G chord, but I do need my pinky over here. Skinny string, 3rd fret. So let's do a quick review. We have the G major chord, ring finger, fat string, middle finger, 5th string, pinky, 2nd string. This is mandatory, folks. Now there are other ways of playing G, but trust me, if you've just been playing a C chord and it's time to go to G, that's how you want to do your G chord. Okay? I'll show you the alternative in a minute, but you got to promise me you're going to do G this way, in this context, okay? There are a lot of things on the guitar where there's more than one right way to do something. This is one of those times, but I'm going to show you the best way to do it in this context. Okay, So C and G back and forth, all right? Let's talk about the principles. I'm on my C chord now, principles. Elbow, left elbow free in the breeze, right? Gotta have it. Thumb feels pretty good right here. You know, simply being aware of where your thumb is, I'm gonna say 95% going towards the right direction. You've already solved a lot of your problems simply by being aware of where your thumb is and knowing that it's mobile. Okay, so here's my elbow free. My thumb feels good right where it is. I'm getting a nice clear sound. On the C chord, I'm not going to strum the fat string. It gives a big, low, boomy E sound. It doesn't always sound so great with the rest of this C chord, so I'm going to avoid the fat string right here. Okay, I'm using the very tips of my fingers on my left hand. The very tips, as close to the fingernail as possible. Curling my fingers around. Okay, now, another principle, finger control. Remember finger control? As my ring and middle finger move to the G chord, see how they're really just barely gliding across the guitar. They were there for C and now G. And if that looks like a subtle movement, that's exactly right. It's got to be as small a movement as possible. Here's worst case scenario. My C chord, and then all of a sudden, well, what just happened? I've lost my frame of reference, I've lost everything, right? Now that's what most of us do at first, because it's hard to control our fine motor skills down here. We're talking about moving fractions of an inch, right? So C chord, middle and ring, just as quickly as you can, as lightly as possible, have them just move right over to the two fat strings. Index finger is off the job here. Pinky, skinny string. Okay, another principle, right? Think of yourself as being in this for the long haul. You can set your stopwatch, say I'm going to do this one strum each for a minute. Now you can go as slowly as you want to, but don't stop for a minute or 2 minutes, whatever you can stand. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to do a C chord, and then I'm going to give myself a chance to switch to G and do that. Here it comes, C, and then G. That's exactly what I want you to do for as long as you can stand it. You can do 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And if you watch my thumb carefully, my thumb is moving just a little tiny bit. It feels more appropriate, it feels better in one place for the C chord and a different place for the G chord. Now I don't want you to worry too much about where my thumb is, more the principle that your thumb is mobile and can move to different places to support different chords in different ways. Now, because this is kind of a dry exercise here, changing between two chords over and over again, we want to find ways to make it more interesting, right? So timing yourself and committing to that 60 seconds or 2 minutes and saying, I'm just going to do this over and over again. It's one way to get a lot better fast at any chord change. But it's also a way to sort of, give yourself an opportunity to focus in without making yourself totally crazy, without saying, I'm going to do this for an hour. Say, well, I'm only going to do it for 3 minutes. We all have 3 minutes in our daily routine to do this. You can find 3 minutes. But you can accomplish so much. Remember, the idea here is that you're not focusing on any fancy strumming. You're not thinking about any specific song. You're focusing on what, for most of us, is a big obstacle, which is changing smoothly and quickly between chords. Okay, so we talked about E minor going to A with our left hand. We talked about C going to G. The principles are the same for any chords, though. Now, you might be working on a song with your teacher that involves fancier chords, might involve bar chords, where the index finger is stretching across all the strings. Some jazzy chords that involve all 4 of your fingers. Could be anything. But the principles are the same. Let's do a quick review. Elbow, free in the air. Okay, using the very tips of your left hand fingers, not the squishy pads in here, but the very tips of your left hand fingers. Memorizing the chords. Remember that one? You got to have the chords memorized, especially if there's only 1 or 2 chords in a song that really hang you up. Memorize the chords, memorize the sequence they go in. Could be G, C, D, could just be A to D, you name it. But memorize what those chords feel like, what they look like. Eyes on your left hand. Another important principle for today, for this moment. Keep your eyes on your left hand. Don't even worry about the right hand. Okay? Your left hand needs you. People improve so much during a practice session once the left hand has your full attention. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, for other things you may learn on the guitar, other moments, other songs, of course it's okay to look at the right hand, to look at the music, to look at your fans, your audience. It's all good. But for today, for this specific exercise, highly encourage you to keep your eyes on your left hand. A lot of students over the years have said to me, well, I want to be able to play without looking at the guitar. It's a great goal. That's not the goal. Okay, it's not the goal. It's a great goal in the long run. I encourage people to have fun when they're practicing and try to play without looking at the guitar. That's separate, though, from what we're talking about today. Okay, in fact, that's the kind of goal you're gonna accomplish that goal whether you intend to or not. You're gonna get better and better at the guitar every day, every month, and you're gonna end up being able to play a lot without looking at the guitar anyways. So what you really want to do is focus on exactly what's holding you back from being the best guitar player you can be. And for a lot of people, it's changing chords with their left hand. Now, for those of you who are lefty guitar players out there, hopefully you've been reversing everything I've been saying today during our episode, and it's your right hand that's working hard on changing chords. Okay, now we have a little time left. Let's talk about A and D. We're talking about A major going to D major. Two pretty easy chords. Let's look at our left hand here. A major, we saw that earlier today, right? I call that 3 fingers right in a row. I'm getting my pinky out of the way just for display purposes here, so you can see those 3 fingers. Index, middle, ring. 4th string, 2nd fret. 3rd string, 2nd fret. 2nd string, 2nd fret. I'm going to strum everything but the fat string. I'm going to strum the 5 remaining strings. Okay, now here's the change, the new chord we haven't talked about today, the D major chord. Now watch how smoothly your fingers can change from A to D. See that? A to D, A to D. Now that takes practice. It's funny that something that looks so easy can take a lot of practice, but it takes practice. So let's talk about this D chord here. Again, it's best to have the pinky sort of hovering close by, but I'm going to get the pinky out of the way just so you can see what's going on here. Pointer finger. 3rd string, 2nd fret, ring finger, 2nd string, 3rd fret, middle finger, 1st string, 2nd fret. So again, principles: elbow, free in the breeze, thumb, mobile, supportive, being aware of where your thumb is a huge part of solving any problems. Okay, fingertips nice and close. I'm going to strum 1 time in each chord. I'm not going to do it for 60 straight seconds, but that's what I want you to do at home, okay? In your practice time. Strumming the A chord, strumming the D chord. Keep your eyes on your left hand. A chord, D chord, okay? All right, so I think you've heard about the different principles going on here today with changing chords. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Again, my name is Jonathan Kiyu. You've been watching The Music Corner. Give us a call, send us an email, and let us know if you have any questions. I'm going to play a little bit with my A and D chords. We'll see you next time here at The Music Corner.